You might look at the technological advancements of the last 50 or even 10 years and think you're living in the sci-fi future. But there is one problem that can't be solved by our brightest minds, fueled by our least ethical mill, bill or trillionaires. Robots are nowhere near what we've seen and read in fiction. In a world where no irresponsible ideas escape untried, the robot, this staple of our tomorrow's world vision, seems always out of reach. Yet it doesn't stop those with an excess of resources from trying, and that is evidence enough that robots grasp deeply at our curiosity. I'm going to talk about why robots are so enduring as an idea in works of art, and maybe through that we can see why there's such a gulf between the robots we imagine and the robots that actually exist, and why that's unavoidable. And it is unavoidable. No humanoid robot, unless it was designed to look like a kid's toy, has ever been anything other than creepy, off-putting, and immediately hateable. There are many fictional robots that we like, and there are plenty of reasons for that, but our first impression is their visual design. If they don't look exactly like a human, then they need to look nothing like a human. Make some parts of the design smooth and rounded, but some parts mechanical, because you're not fooling anyone and we don't appreciate you trying to fool us. That's the uncanny valley effect. Something that looks close to human but is just a little bit off will be immediately unappealing to anyone. Similarly, make the voice as robotic as you want. There are iconic robot voices that we love, and even text-to-speech programs have been popularized by Stephen Hawking and by memes. But once again, AI voices pretending to be human is always either subtly wrong or totally repulsive. On a superficial level, our repulsion to fake human behaviour seems so inherently built into our brains that any amount of stylization or separation from realistic feels better to us. Anyone who's ever tried and failed to draw or paint a realistic face knows exactly how the smallest deviation can make your creation look inhuman. Depiction of a believable human is a great challenge where the reward is the power to evoke emotions through your depiction. The difficulty is most apparent when you see people try and make robots with a moving human face. And even if you remove the need for the faces to move, which is a pretty important part of the face's job, you then get something like waxworks models, which still appear creepy to some people. Me, I find them creepy. And yet many artists have mastered the skill of detailed human depiction. Making a likable robot is completely different in works of art, where the creator has full control of your experience and knows exactly how to use your imagination to believe what you're looking at and see it as appealing. This is especially the case in writing, where the job of creating a human-like robot can mostly be done by your imagination. That's why it's so much easier for AI chatbots to pretend to be human in the context of a text chat, rather than voice or visuals. Human-like design, or at least appealing design, is a big first step towards making us like a robot, hence science fiction will give you human-looking characters to represent robots you're supposed to like Cortana from Halo or Crichton from Red Dwarf. The ones we should hate and be scared of have no form, like HAL 9000. But it takes a lot more than just being not creepy for us to fall in love with robots and AI, so here's why and how we love fictional robots. Robots in science fiction can tell stories incapable of those being told with human characters. Most influentially, you can see this in Asimov's I, Robot. We love to ponder what it means to be human, but also how our actions can make us more or less human. So, what better a character to explore this than one that can intelligently observe and react, but nobody considers human? While you could say all stories are a character reacting to people around them, a robot approaches this concept as an outsider. Maybe their reaction will be hatred and violence, such as Am, or maybe it will be curiosity and kindness, or the longing to embody humanity's greatest traits, like the Bicentennial Man. But just as these robots take on human traits from seeing humanity all around them, we imagine them fitting so seamlessly into our world because they are technology, and technology is often more ubiquitous to us in our lives than humans are. Imagining a robot that is like a human becomes the next natural step that begins with using technology as a tool for repetitive physical processes like laundry and travel, and continues by using technology as a tool to create art. For example, a drawing tablet that links the artist with the digital canvas, which makes the technology far more intimate in a process that is uniquely human. When technology becomes part of the creative process, it becomes easier to imagine the technology being the one doing the creating, when obviously that is not the case. In the real world, the idea that the machine would create art is one we find repulsive, and rightfully so. Humans are the only ones capable of creativity. Nothing else can build a culture of such beautiful creations as art does. Yet we suspend our disgust for the idea in fiction, such as musical acts that pretend to be robots, whether it's costumed and vocoded performers like Daft Punk or digital audio-visual shows like Hatsune Miku. It works so well as a performance persona because it represents full immersion of the artist into the art, and we admire the commitment. The tools of my art are technology, so I must become technology. I make music using technology, and that is what I am. I sacrifice everything to the music, even my humanity. And you would think that buying into that performance, as you would believe characters in a play, would mean believing that these are real machines, but we can enjoy the music without any of the disdain that we would feel for AI-generated slop. Perhaps our immersion is more nuanced than I just made out, and we can like fake robots and hate real robots, but in my observation, emotional reactions are not able to display much logic, if any. Instead, I'd propose the following. We see depictions in art as entirely conceptual. Until we meet them in the real world, people are just ideas. A character in a novel is no different to an actor in a play, is no different to a marble statue, is no different to a musician's performance persona. We do not think of robots as the reality of robots when they're presented conceptually. Rather, we see them as being equal to people. You can either see this as the dehumanization of performing artists or the personification of everything else. The technology presented to us in works of art is held in our minds as completely separate from the technology we hear about in the news that slowly works its way into our real lives. This automatic conceptualization, the pretending of humans being robots and the acceptance of robots being like humans, even when we know the process involves real people, it may be hard to admit. Of course, we know that humans are the ones creating the art, and we can separate what's real from what's in stories. But there are important differences about how we think of what's real and what we see as real versus the concept and what we think of as conceptual. For example, take fire. We know that fire in real life is dangerous, it's painful, it kills us, and in our daily lives we generally try to prevent it any way we can. But in many religious and mythological stories, fire is seen as necessary for rebirth. Not inherently negative, just a change. You can see this in fire's association with Shiva of Hinduism or Surt from Norse mythology. It may be painful, but it's an inevitable rebirth symbolized by fire. Of course, it's important to make that distinction, so you don't get the idea to set yourself on fire, or even just misread a story. In a story where you're told someone is thrown into flames, is it literal or just symbolic? Are they being tortured or undergoing a drastic change? Symbolism is all over ancient stories, so maybe it's the modern association of robots that makes it more awkward for us to automatically assume that we conceptualize everything. But we do. The process is still happening in any story. Symbolism is all over ancient stories, so maybe it's the modern association with robots that makes it more awkward for us to acknowledge the truth that we conceptualize everything in art, and that is very different to how we think about things in real life. Failure to understand the separation between real world and concept has important implications that already affect how we see technology. Consider a book that has a cast of human characters, and also in the cast is one robot. Every character, including the robot, exists in the book's world. They emote, they move, they talk to each other as the story comes to life in our head. To us, the humans are described on the page just as the robot is described on the page, being presented as an entity in the same way, the only way that the medium can, through words. Now, in this story, the robot could be presented as very different in ability, obviously. Perhaps They can interface with technology really well, makes sense, but they struggle to convey emotions. We've talked about how the visual aspect can be difficult, as you might expect. That difference, the inclusion of talents and flaws, does not make the robots seem less human, it makes them seem more human. Navigating the experience of being different is humanizing, even essential to the human experience. Now obviously the robot is dehumanized whenever you are reminded that they are a robot, but feeling dehumanized can also be a very human experience. We can relate that to our real experiences of feeling dehumanized, especially if it was caused by a human character. Even something totally normal in real life in the context of dehumanizing a fictional machine can feel like oppression if the machine has been sufficiently humanized in words. If you've ever felt like you weren't treated as you should be, you may sympathize with this robot character more than actual humans in the story. This has certainly been close to my experience as an autistic person and observing autistic communities online. Lots of us like stories with robots in, because we can see parts of ourselves reflected in the struggles not experienced by most other people, but also of the robot's unique perspective or ability. A dedication, focus, and distance from others can lead to incredible achievements, sometimes despite the lack of understanding from others and sometimes because of it. Robots can represent our ability, all of us, to act beyond our perceived potential, combined with the struggle of living in a world that was not designed to accommodate us as we are and only expects things from us. From the perspective of a human character, you get to see what kind of person they are by how they act towards the robot. Against a being without rights, your personality can be judged by whether you're taking advantage of that or whether you look for redeeming features wherever you can. You could almost view the robot as a versatile literary device, to the extent that real-life humanoid robots probably shouldn't even use the same word. That's why I'm happy to sacrifice the word AI to be the controversial catch-all term at this moment in history. It's fine, gamers will just need to stop using the word to mean behaviour of non-player characters. Still, not everyone has been able to consciously internalise this separation between real and fake robots, and I'm convinced this is the psychology behind people who are trying to replicate the experience of romantic relationships with AI. This is not an insult to these people. I think we can sympathise if we consider the situation. We all consume some kind of art regularly as we live our lives, so imagine you were always in the middle of some emotionally affecting science fiction story that seemed to argue robots are no different to humans, without the introspection that any analogy to the real world needs to replace robots with just people who are different. Add the concept of a perceived hopelessness in your human relationships and the fact that technology always seems to advance and change our lives at an entirely unpredictable rate, then the delusion that machines alone could satisfy you emotionally becomes nearly understandable. This is all the more reason why we should accept that as a society, human-like robots are not something we should have or should want. Accept this just as you eventually did flying cars, because robots are not unique in helping us separate fact from fiction. In fact, there's a lot of ambiguity where robots are concerned, exacerbated by people who make loads of money convincing us that self-aware robots are just days away if only we had the data centers. Now, the works of art we consume have real impacts on our prejudices, such as against technology. So perhaps robots are unique as a symbol of something societally relevant at this point in history, but there are plenty of other ways that robots are unique in art, mainly as being a non-human form from which we can explore what being human means. We can learn the boundaries of what being a human really means, and what emotions can be evoked by non-human entities and coming to terms with those. We can consider the ways technology naturally fits into our lives, and how to humanize people even when they don't look like people to us. We can learn what we are as a reflection of what we are not. You can learn who we are through the nature of what we have created.